Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, The Science of Floor Covering Adhesives and How They Relate to Mapei Installation Products. We have some brief housekeeping before we start. Your phones are on mute. If you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box in the corner of your screen, and we'll answer them at the end of today's session, time permitting, or via an email after. And you can always send questions to mapeidigital@mapei.com. We also invite you to visit the Floor Covering and Installation Systems page on our website, www.mapei.com, where we have videos, projects, system solutions, and much more, all of which happens to be overseen by today's speaker, the business manager for Mapei's Floor Covering and Installation Systems product line, Jeff Johnson. Jeff brings to the industry more than 30 years' experience in the development and marketing of floor covering installation products. His practical experience in the construction industry and as a bench chemist give him an insightful perspective on surface preparation, moisture mitigation, and floor covering installation, including the science of adhesives. Some of those insights he's going to share with us now. Jeff, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jen, and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for taking a little bit of your time out of the day to learn a little bit about sticky stuff. I think it's important for all of us to get an understanding of what goes into making an adhesive and how they work and how they stick stuff together. So if you'll bear with me, we're going to kind of go through a presentation and hopefully you'll get some education out of it. I will echo what Jen has said before. If you do have a question about anything I'm saying here, please put it in the chat window or email it to us later, and I'll certainly get back to you with an explanation. So what are the objectives of the time together today? What we're going to basically do is to discuss the basic adhesive types and components of each. And this is just for the sake of scope. We're only going to be talking about adhesives used for the installation of floor covering, resilient type of flooring, carpet, and wood. I'm not going to be addressing too much in the form of anything to do with ceramic tile. That's a whole different ball of wax, but that's not what we're here for. So adhesives that are involved in resilient carpet and wood installation. We're going to explain how they work, how they function, how they bond, and how they cure, and what kind of environmental aspects are going to affect their bond performance. This is also something that's very important so that we look for potential problems and pitfalls that would prevent an adhesive from delivering its performance that it's supposed to. We're going to address why there's so many different types of adhesives and how they interface with different flooring types. I don't know how many times I've been asked, why can't I just have one glue to do everything? There are probably solutions for that, but the economic choices that would not necessarily fit for every kind of flooring that we're installing. So there are a variety of different glues to talk about, and that's the reason why. Hopefully at the end of this, you will have a better understanding of how to recognize, how to select the right adhesive for the job, how to use it, and how to work with it. So those are, in a nutshell, the basic learning objectives that we're going to be dealing with here. So just like a golfer who, many of you are golfers out there. Me, I'm just kind of a hacker. I create nightmares for the grounds crew, but you don't have more than one club in your bag. You need to have a driver, you need to have a pitching wedge, you need to have a putter. So just like a golfer, in terms of adhesives used to install traditional floor covering, you need a different club for those particular types of situations. And these are the types of adhesives that we will be talking about today, and hopefully we'll have a better understanding of when we get to the end. We'll be talking about multi-purpose latex adhesives. We've heard them called latex multi-purpose adhesives. They're typically SBR, which stands for styrene butadiene rubber latex adhesives. We're going to be talking about acrylic latex adhesives, epoxies, urethanes, and a relatively newcomer to the floor covering market, not terribly new, but Silane modified adhesives. So those are the ones that we're going to be spending a great deal of time talking about how they're made, how they work, and how to use them properly. Okay, so to start with, let's talk about what goes into an SBR adhesive, what goes into that styrene butadiene rubber adhesive. And to start with, these are the basic components that the bench chemist is going to be working with to create an SBR or multi-purpose latex. We start off with a styrene butadiene rubber latex. The latex is basically a water dispersion of a polymer compound. And we basically take the styrene butadiene rubber, for example, is the same kind of rubber that you use to make car tires with. And thank God it's not water soluble, or we'd be having a lot of problems with our cars. But there are ways to take that styrene butadiene rubber, get it into an emulsion by coating it with soaps and surfactants, and then adding it to a liquid like water, and you create a latex. When the water evaporates, you wind up with the original rubber material. So that's basically a definition of latex. We also use hydrocarbon resin. Excuse me, I may have missed a slide. Hold on a second. No. A hydrocarbon resin. Okay, one thing I need to mention to you is that styrene butadiene rubber latex, but rubber by itself is not terribly sticky. It has a little bit of grab to it if you think about that car tire analogy, but generally speaking, it's like a rubber band, not terribly sticky. In order to get it sticky, you have to add something to make it sticky, and that's where we talk about the addition of hydrocarbon resins. Hydrocarbon resins and rosin esters and so on. Think of the stuff that gymnasts will rub on their hands to make their hands stickier when they're working on the parallel bars or the pommel horse, whatever. Hydrocarbon resins are the sticky part of a latex adhesive, but hydrocarbon resins are oil-based, and again, they don't necessarily want to go into solution. You just can't drop them in a glass of water and stir them around and hope they will go into solution. That's not going to happen. In the past, when I talk about the past, times before 1985 or 86 or even 1890, when we used to have solvated latex adhesives, we would take that hydrocarbon resin and mix it up with mineral spirits or VMP naphtha or even toluene to get that into solution, which would be a very thick, sticky, gooey mass. We would add some surfactants to it and then blend that into the latex to make a rubbery, sticky latex mass. But with everybody's concern and rightful concerns about VOC emissions and green requirements we're faced with these days, the addition of mineral spirits, VMP naphtha, and toluene is really frowned on, so we can't do that anymore. But we still have the problem of getting that hydrocarbon resin into a liquid form so we can add it to the latex, and that's where process oils come into play. Process oil, for lack of better description, is an ultra clean 1040 motor oil. It is a hydrocarbon-based petrochemical product. In some respects, it's a non-volatile solvent. You know, follow my language on that. It just doesn't evaporate. It's a solvent that doesn't evaporate. You can leave oil out in a jar for years and centuries, and it's still going to be oil. It's not going to evaporate. So, but it still has the solvating properties or something like that of traditional solvent-based materials. So we will take the hydrocarbon resin, blend it with a process oil, and heat it up to create a solution. Again, a heavy-bodied, heavy viscous, very sticky product. We add some surfactant or soap to that to create an emulsion, and then we put the hydrocarbon, we put our latexes in and whatever else we need to put in it, and that creates the glue. There are a couple other things we add to these formulations. Filler, which adds to a certain amount of the reinforcement structure of the adhesive itself, and water is a means to dilute the product down. So just as a frame of reference, the hydrocarbon resin, the latex, and the process oils are where the money is. That's all very expensive. The fillers in the water are obviously less expensive, so we use those to adjust the cost to make a product and change its performance properties as well. So in terms of adhesive design, a bench chemist utilizes all of those various materials to create different types of glues. For example, if we were trying to formulate a clear thin spread VCT adhesive, there's a reason why we do that. So we need something that's very sticky. So in this particular case, they will take that resin solution and move the meter up very high. That resin solution is the hydrocarbon resin in a process oil. We put a lot of that in. They needs to be pretty rubbery and resilient, so we add a lot more styrene butadiene rubber latex. We put virtually no filler in it because we want something that's clear. You want to be able to snap chalk lines on the floor and trowel adhesive over it, and after it's dried, you can see the chalk line. So we don't want any filler that's going to block the view. And we also want something that flashes off very quickly, dries quickly, so that we can get to the installation process. So we really don't add much water. So these adhesives, clear thin spread VCT glues, as you can tell by the formula here, is a relatively expensive product to make, but does exactly what it's supposed to do. Now we take those same materials to make a high performance wet set adhesive. And this is designed for, things like Lee's Unibond carpets or products that need a lot of grab and a lot of bond to them. We will modify the sliders here. We'll add a lot more SBR rubber and a high concentration of resin solution to make them durable, take a lot of traffic. We are going to add some filler to it because we don't really need all that cost to it, and we still add a low amount of water to the formulation. So a high performance wet set latex adhesive for carpet is relatively high solids, has very quick grab, very sticky materials, and legs up very quickly. So that's some of the attributes that we deal with there. And then we modify these sliders to develop different types of adhesives as we need to. A mid-range multi-purpose adhesive has mid-range levels, but you'll notice that we're adding more filler and a little bit more water to that solution. What that's going to do in turn is take that material and slow it down a little bit. The more water means it's got to take longer to evaporate. So these are mid-range solids level materials. That slow bond strength, a slow drying process is helpful if you're doing pattern material, if you're installing felt back sheet goods, if that even exists these days. The world's kind of made some changes in that flooring category, but if there is a felt back sheet flooring and you need to place it on the floor, or has a fibrous back, you don't want something that grabs into that very quickly because you will tear it. So this is done by design. And then base grade adhesives, these are the least costly to make. And as you notice, we have a lot more filler and a lot more water into them, and low on the SBR, the resin solution. Now, you may say to me, well, that's a junk adhesive. And I would argue to a certain extent that this adhesive is the absolute best adhesive to use if you know you're going to replace a flooring in 3 to 4 years after it's been installed. I had some conversations with a contractor in a very large commercial contract group who was lamenting to me that he was doing all of his carpet installations with a high performance, high solids wet set carpet glue. It looked great, everything was working very well until he had to come back and replace them 5 years later and couldn't get the stuff off the floor. Had to bring in the terminators and the mechanical grinders to get the adhesive off the floor. So, one of the things that I always talk about or argue about is there's no such thing as a good, better, best in these adhesive selections, which I've given you here, the high performance, mid-range, and low range. They all have perfect solutions for what you're trying to install. So you need to think about things like, what is the traffic conditions? What is the life expectancy of the floor? How often is it going to be replaced? In some cases, that base grade multi-purpose adhesive is going to be your best solution for going forward. So what are some of the performance attributes of an SBR latex or multi-purpose adhesive? a wide range of performance attributes based on applications. We've gone everything from a clear thin spread product all the way out to a high performance non-porous carpet backing. Where they're used are primarily for felt backed and fibrous backed flooring, including many traditional carpet types. Some of their downsides is that they are not always freeze-thaw stable. And I think it's important to mention at this point in time that it's particularly this time of year when fall is upon us and winter is coming. I don't know how many times I get this question is, are your products freeze-thaw stable? Which implies that the product is already frozen. Please do not let water-based adhesives freeze. It's just really not a good situation. All of our technical data sheets and all of our performance attributes are based on adhesives being kept at room temperature or somewhere between 50 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Freezing them causes weird things to happen to the latex structure. It's never going to be the same type of adhesive after it's frozen. It's just not a good situation. So please do not allow water-based adhesives to freeze. It's not a good solution, not a good situation. The other downside about SBR latex adhesives is that they are sensitive to plasticizer migration, something we need to talk a little bit about here. What is plasticizer? We'll get to that in a minute. How do SBR latex adhesives work? They are being water-based adhesives, have to dry by water evaporation, which allows the film to coalesce. So that's important to know, and we'll talk about this in several other instances with other water-based adhesives. If the temperature is cool, it's not going to evaporate and not going to cure up as quickly as you would like to. If the temperature is hot and the ambient air is dry, these things will evaporate very quickly. So you need to monitor your installation conditions, and that's kind of also outlined in a lot of our technical data sheets to being somewhere between 50 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit and a relative humidity of 50%. That's when things work very well. But if you're working in cold environments and it's 50 degrees, the concrete's 50 degrees, and you have high humidity, it's going to take a long time for these kind of adhesives to dry. So just keep that in mind when you're working with them. So as the water leaves an SBR latex adhesive, the stability of the product falls apart on purpose. And this is when you get that resin solution that breaks out of stability. And that's what gives you, when you're pulling that carpet ridge up and you're saying, oh, look at those legs. That's some great leg development. That's what's happening when the glue is drying and curing up. It's really kind of interesting to me is it really has no function on the overall performance of the glue, this leg development, but we all like to look at it for some reason. It does help in some respects hold a piece of carpet that has some sort of texture, not texture, but memory to it. It wants to curl up out of the adhesive bed. SBR adhesives have great ability to hold that in place during the curing process to keep it from popping back out of the glue. So things that'll affect SBR adhesive performance, and again, this is going to be repeated numerous times during the course of this presentation, but the pH of the substrate is going to cause significant problems, and that's why we always recommend you check the pH of the concrete slab. Anything typically above 11 is indicative of a problem, whether it be a water moisture transmission issue, an efflorescence issue. The salts that are on there are not good for adhesive performance. You don't want to add salt to the product as you were installing it. Contaminants like drywall dust, taco juice, oil is not good to have on as a contaminant to the floor. That will create some problems. Temperature, as I mentioned before. Moisture, obviously we spend a lot of time talking about moisture of the concrete, but this also is moisture in the atmosphere, the air that's above the adhesive. And we want to make sure that you're installing floor covering adhesives in temperatures that are above the dew point of the environment. You certainly don't want to trowel glue down the temperature drops below the dew point and you have condensation forming on the top of your wet glue. That's going to create more of a problem for you long-term going forward. And then plasticizer migration resistance as well. Now, where does the plasticizer come from? And you need to realize that anytime you're dealing with a polyvinyl chloride, a PVC flooring, it has to have some sort of a plasticizer in it. This chemical picture you see in the front of you is an example of dibutyl phthalate. It's a common plasticizer used. PVC in its raw form is very rigid, as you can see in the PVC piping on the image on the left. That's going to make really lousy flooring material if you have a rigid sheet of materials. We add a plasticizer to that during the compounding phase to make something more flexible, something that we can move around, roll around, shape, and put into the floor. Those plasticizers are not good for the hydrocarbon resin or the styrene butadiene rubber that's in a latex adhesive. That plasticizer will migrate out and leave the vinyl and move into whatever's next to it. I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember this, but back in the days when we had vinyl dashes and old cars, that you could see the film residue on the inside of the windshield as the vinyl, the plasticizer left the vinyl. These kind of chemicals move. They leave the vinyl and they make it more brittle. And I've driven a few cars that had cracked vinyl dashes. My old Volkswagen that I have, this restored Volkswagen, has got cracks on it because of this problem. The plasticizer leaves. So when that plasticizer leaves and goes into an SBR latex, it turns it into mush. It softens it, just like it softened the PVC. It's going to soften the SBR latex. So that's why you cannot use SBR latex adhesives in direct contact with vinyl products. How to properly use them. Again, a lot of this information is going to repeat, and I won't go through this every time we get to the slide, but a lot of this is also on your technical data sheet. Please make sure that the subfloor is properly prepared according to whatever we talk about. It's got to be flat, clean, free of any dirt and debris. The installation temperatures have to be maintained. You can't expect these products to work if you install it at 60 degrees and you leave at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and everybody turns the air conditioning, the heaters off, and it gets down to below freezing temperatures that night. That's not going to work. You do need to measure the moisture content of the substrate and remediate if necessary. Most SBR adhesives are probably good up to that 8-pound, 10-pound moisture vapor emission rate and maybe 80 to 85% RH conditions. But generally speaking, they're not the monsters when it comes to standing up to high moisture conditions in concrete. You always want to use a properly notched trowel. I don't know how many times I've seen notched trowels that are worn down and the contractor says, yeah, but I get such great coverage out of the glue this way. Please use the right trowel and a properly notched trowel. Monitor your flash times and open times. Again, this is information that's written out in your technical data sheet. Some of these adhesives need to remain open so that the water has a chance to evaporate. And then once that phase is done, you have a certain window for when that adhesive will still receive the floor covering and bond properly. If you go past that working time, then you've got dead adhesive and the product's not going to stick properly. And obviously match the right adhesive to the right floor covering. Do not use SBR adhesives for vinyl flooring, for example. What goes wrong? Obviously, hopefully none of you will have to deal with these things, but the subfloor can be contaminated. That'll cause different problems. The installation temperature is too high or low, a high moisture content, high pH, the trowel not putting the right amount of adhesive on the floor, installed too early, not a chance to breathe, installed too late, got into dead glue, and so on and so forth. Just for those of you who are contractors out there listening to this presentation, we have ways to find out whether or not you did this right. Trust me, it doesn't help to lie in situations like this. If you didn't do it right, let's work together and solve the problem. But if you tell me you did everything according to the technical data sheet and we pull up a corner and take a look at trowel notch patterns and so on and so forth, we can definitely see what actually happened here. So follow the instructions, pay attention to your technical data sheets, and off we go. Mapei has quite a few SBR latex adhesives in our line. Many of them I'm sure you're familiar with. We have base grade, mid-range, and high performance carpet adhesives in the family there. And we have a couple of VCT glues, Eco 711, it's a clear thin spread, and Eco 611, which is an asphalt emulsion product with an SBR rubber backbone. So these are the products that Mapei has that are in that SBR family, okay? Let's move into the next chemical family and talk about what goes into an acrylic adhesive. That's a little bit different chemistry involved altogether. And this is a little bit shorter list of chemicals. And again, I'm not downplaying the work that our chemists do to make these things. This is still complicated science to be able to make the right performance products that we deal with. But in general speaking, their work with acrylic polymers, some amount of fillers, and a little bit of diluent in the form of water to make these things work. But this is where we talk about the glass transition factor. Most of our acrylic latexes that we use, again, they're all water-based acrylic dispersions. We just talked about a very similar technique as an SBR latex, but with acrylics, we get an awful lot more fun, if you will, in creating different kinds of performance attributes by changing the glass transition temperature of the polymer. I guess you can kind of look at it this way. If you have a very short chain, how do I explain that? A very short piece of string, you wiggle that between each other, you don't get to have much movement backwards and forwards. A medium piece of string, you can move it around a little bit more, and a very long piece of string, you can make it very floppy. The same thing is true with acrylic polymer structures. Short chain polymer structures will make something that's very glassy and very rigid and very hard, like plexiglass is a very high glass transition material. Products that are in the middle of that glass transition phase are what we call the rubbery phase, something that you can actually stretch and bend and move around. And then when we get to the very end of that flow, a viscous flow, a very low glass transition temperature, you can get acrylics that are actually fluid in nature. Well, obviously, fluid stuff that's going to remain fluid is not really a good solution for floor covering insulation. You want some sort of resiliency in the formulation. So the chemist's job is to figure out what glass transition temperature he needs for what particular flooring, and choose products accordingly. So much as we did in the SBR, we have a slider, if you will, on glass transition temperature. If I want to install something with that has a very hard permanent bond situation, I'm going to select an adhesive that has a very high glass transition temperature, which means that, let's say, for example, it has a glass transition temperature above 40 degrees Fahrenheit, which means anything above that range, it's going to be very hard. Anything below that 40 range, you're going to get maybe a little bit of movement, but the object here is to have something hard. These are products that we need to be aware of that do not have any sticky nature to them. When they're dry, they have no stickiness to them. They're like painting on, it's like acrylic paints. For lack of a better description, when you paint with an acrylic latex paint and allows to dry, it's not sticky. These hard set adhesives that we use for certain applications, when they are dry, there's absolutely no tack to them at all. So you have to install into them while they're wet. Pressure sensitive adhesives, on the other hand, have a much lower transition temperature. So that means 25, 10 degrees Fahrenheit, anything above that, they're in that rubbery phase. Anything below that, they're starting to get a little bit more rigid. I may have just given you the numbers upside down, but bear with me, you'll get the general gist of what I'm talking about. But when we get a low glass transition temperature, you get something that's very sticky. And that's important for things like carpet tile, LVT, other vinyl flooring materials. You want something that has stickiness. So you can allow the adhesive to completely dry, all the water's left the system, and you have something that's very sticky. But keep in mind that the lower you get to that glass transition temperature, the softer it's going to get. We're getting more to that viscous flow, as opposed to something up a little bit more on the left side where you get something a little bit more tougher. So this is the challenge that the chemist has to deal with to create pressure sensitive adhesives for unique applications. There is a category of pressure sensitive adhesive we deal with called transitional PSAs. And this is an adhesive that starts out in its life as a very sticky material, but over time will cross-link and kind of move back up to that plateau to become a little bit tougher. Transitional, they use the word transitional, phase changing, whatever you want to call it, but they'll start out in their life as a little bit of a sticky adhesive. And as I mentioned, as they age, by chemical cross-linking, they become a little bit more brittle and they will get tougher. Will they be as hard as a wet set adhesive? The answer to that question is no. They will get close to it, but nothing can beat the strength, if you will, of a wet set, high TG type of adhesive, okay? The various performance attributes of an acrylic adhesive is their wide range of performance based on that selection of that polymer glass transition temperature. They are plasticizer migration resistant, which is why they are used primarily for vinyl and rubber flooring. They're also oxidation resistant. A lot of acrylics are not sensitive to oxidation. They're not sensitive to UV light, where SBR latexes would be. Again, where they're designed for, primarily for anything which is going to come in contact with vinyl or rubber flooring. The downsides about them are they are generally not legging while they're wet. I get a little bit of explanation there. Pressure sensitive adhesives, when they're dry and in their tacky phase, have some sense of legging, but it's a very kind of aggressive, non-movable leg. Yet, if you understand what I'm saying there, it's sticky and grabby, but not legging. So it's not like a carpet glue that you can peel back and see big long legs underneath it. Not sure if that's a downside, but it's some attribute of the product itself. The other thing you have to be a little bit aware of is the price. Acrylics, generally speaking, are going to be 2 to 3 times more expensive than SBR adhesives. The good news is use a lot less of them. Most of the trowel notches for acrylic adhesives are in that 16th square notch, 1/32 U notch range. So you're getting coverages in the range of 150 to 250 square feet per gallon. SBR adhesives, on the other hand, have coverage rates a lot less, 85 to 100 square feet per gallon at the most for most carpet installations. How they work, again, very similar to an SBR. Any latex has to dry by evaporation and allow the film coalescence. Here, it's important to note and mention that if you're working with an acrylic that's a PSA, you really need to make sure you get it dried before you install floor covering. Leaving any kind of moisture left in the PSA, particularly when we're dealing with high moisture resistant acrylic pressure sensitive adhesives, you need to make sure that those adhesives are completely dry, no white left on the ridges, no water left on the system, because those will cause the product to re-emulsify back if you're in a high moisture condition. So if you're dealing with a concrete slab that's 15 pounds moisture vapor emission, 99% RH, and you're installing a high performance moisture resistant PSA adhesive, but don't let it dry out completely and stick LVT on top of it or sheet vinyl on top of it, you will have a problem. It's very important to make sure that it's all very dry. Again, the performance attributes, they're plasticizer, migration resistant, oxidation resistant. but they still have many of the same sensitivities that SBRs do. The pH of a substrate is very important to watch for. These products are good, again, up to a range of 11. If it gets higher than that, 12 to 14, I've seen acrylics hydrolyze. You pull off the flooring, you'll smell like a ketone, like a fingernail polish smell off of them. That's very indicative of the fact that the high pH has caused that acrylic to fall apart. The contaminants, the temperature, and the moisture, again, are all kinds of things that have to be aware of for acrylics. How to properly use them, again, same story here before, but you definitely need to watch the flash time or open time, particularly if you're using adhesives on high moisture condition slabs. And a lot of these PSAs now are being recommended to use that way. That's great. They work phenomenal in those environments, but you got to make sure you allow all the water to get off and before you install floor covering, or you can potentially have a problem. What goes wrong? Obviously, these are the kinds of things that all water-based adhesives have to face with. Very similar situations going forward. In terms of adhesives that are acrylic-based in the Mapei line, we have a variety of wet set adhesives and some pressure sensitive, obviously. The wet set adhesives are products like Eco 300, 575, 901, and 960. Now keep in mind that the wet set adhesives product category are not in the family of what we call high moisture resistant systems. These have to be installed on products that have some porosity and are on dry concrete. I think the most we do with these things is maybe an 8 pounds, 80% RH conditions. But they need to be drier because they have to penetrate, the water's they have to be wet set. So that means you're putting a non-porous substrate on top of them. The water's got to go somewhere, and that means it's got to sink into the concrete or the wood that's going underneath it. So pressure sensitive adhesives, we have quite a few of them as well. If I missed your favorite on the listing, I apologize. I'll modify the slide, but we have quite a few in this domain. What goes into making an epoxy adhesive? That's another interesting chemistry that we get to work with. And when you are working with an epoxy on the job site, this is your first chance to actually become a chemist. And you're actually going to be mixing part A and part B. And it's very important that you do this in the appropriate manner. I'm going to introduce you to a word called stoichiometry. You can use that at your next cocktail outing. Hey, do you know what the stoichiometry of this old-fashioned cocktail is? But what it is, it means that you have to add an exact amount of part A to an exact amount of part B in order to get what you want to. And I'll hearken you back to your old chemistry science days in high school and junior high school, where 2 moles of hydrogen gas mixed with 1 mole of oxygen gas creates 2 moles of water. This is an exact science. So now why I'm talking about this is it's very important that when you mix an epoxy adhesive together, that you follow the instructions. 1 part A mixed with 1 part B. And 2 part B's to 1 part A does not necessarily work. You can't, more is not better in this particular case. So very important to realize, get all of the part B out of the jar to mix into part B. So we'll talk more about mixing here in a minute. The components of an epoxy adhesive, and by the way, there will be a test on this subject at the end of the presentation. No, I'm just kidding. But I wanted to show you a little bit of the chemical structure, just so you understand what happens and why. Epoxy is a reaction between 2 chemicals. One is an epoxy resin, and the other is an amine hardener. The epoxy resin is a very interesting chemical structure, and I've got a circle around that oxygen bond to this 2 carbon hydrogen bonds. That's a spring-loaded trap that if you bring an amine close to it, it's going to spring open, just like that mouse trap, release a lot of energy and lock itself together. This is what the chemical reaction of epoxy works for. So the performance attributes of an epoxy is that they're extremely high bond strengths. They are the monster in terms of glue. When they react, they're super strong, super brittle. I don't think anything really quite beats an epoxy. Where they're designed for, in high performance applications of vinyl and rubber flooring. If you are concerned about rolling load resistance or heavy traffic on top of resilient flooring, epoxies are the best solution. They don't move once they're bonded and once they're mixed and they're done. The downsides of them is that there's no green strength to them, so they're a little bit oily, and they're also mass dependent for curing, so they're very temperature dependent, which is a good thing and a bad thing. If you get them out thin, they will take a little while to cure, but if you leave them in the bucket, they can create an exothermic reaction and actually melt the plastic bucket that it was being mixed in. This is a real picture of a bucket of an epoxy material that was left in the pail, and it generated enough material to actually melt the plastic. How they work is they work by chemical reaction. Doesn't really matter whether it's in opportunity to evaporate or coalesce. It's a chemical process that's actually happening once you mix the part A and part B together. But there are some things that will affect those performances. Temperature is going to change it. Hot temperature is going to make that reaction go faster. Cold temperature is going to make it go slower. Moisture is obviously something that, in this particular case, topical moisture. You don't want water anywhere near these adhesives because that will be a bond breaker. The most important and critical factor is improper mixing. If you just pour A and B and use a paint stirrer to mix them up, they're not necessarily going to get the best performance. You'll wind up with pockets of B and pockets of A that weren't mixed properly, and you're going to call tech service and say, why do I have spots that are bonded and spots that are not bonded? And it's because it wasn't mixed properly. Follow the instructions, use the right mixing equipment, make sure that these things are properly mixed before you put them on the floor. Also, once they're properly mixed, get them out of the bucket and onto the floor immediately. Don't let it sit around in the bucket for any period of time. I've heard stories about guys who will put the bucket of glue in an ice bed or an ice bin to keep it from reacting. Not necessarily a recommended procedure, but you get what I'm saying. If it gets colder, it slows it down. Again, how to properly use epoxy adhesives. The most critical important factor here is that these are going to be 100% solids. When you install a floor covering, you need to stay off of it once it's installed, because if you step on it and squish it, it's going to move away from your installation and it's going to show up later in life. And I think that's really most important, is what goes wrong. It's hard to see, but in that upper left-hand corner, you'll probably see a footprint in that vinyl flooring. Somebody stepped on wet glue, the adhesive moved out, and that did not come back in during the curing process. So that is a problem that'll have to be addressed. You either have to replace it, remove it, start over again, but stay off the flooring. Standard practice for the vinyl floor covering installation is to use walk-off boards, pieces of masonite plywood on the floor that was recently installed, so that you don't have this indentation problems happening. Okay, obviously following the working time is very important. The adhesives have a limited working time. It's relatively forgiving, but once you're past that, it becomes a glass and there's absolutely nothing left to do with it, okay? We do have a couple of epoxy-based adhesives. Now the names here are a little bit misleading. These are epoxy modified polyurethane floor covering adhesives. We have two of them in the line, G19 and G21. They come pre-set in a kit of a part A and a part B. Please follow the instructions on how to mix them going forward. And what goes into a urethane adhesive? And this will be the last chemistry basis that we're dealing with here. Polyurethane adhesives in this particular case, I'm talking about our one component moisture cured polyurethane adhesive. There are other two-part polyurethane adhesives in our industry, some of which are for sport flooring, some of which are in other domains, but for FCIS, for my product line, we're going to talk a little bit about moisture curing adhesives. What this is a reaction of an isocyanate group with moisture or a hydroxyl group, and that creates this rubber Again, I'm showing you a little bit of a picture here, a chemical structure where this isocyanate group, the nitrogen carbon oxygen reacts with moisture in the air. What's most important to talk about in this particular chemistry is that a normal byproduct of this chemical reaction is CO2 gas. And this is important to note, is that if you get too much moisture in these products, you can get too much carbon dioxide foaming and a weak bond. We'll talk a little bit of that. Oh, yeah, so let's spend a little bit of time talking about isocyanate. And whenever I mention that word, a lot of people's red flags and yellow sirens go off. Oh my God, this is death in a can. Isocyanates in our formulations are very well controlled and not something really to be worried about in our industry. In the factory, where these kinds of products are made and you're dealing with pure isocyanates, they're something that you need to be conditioned to be aware of and take precautions for. The good news is that when our formulations, we don't deal with pure isocyanates in their molecular form. I'm going to say them out loud: toluene diisocyanate, isoprene diisocyanate. These are the kinds of products that are used by other raw material manufacturing companies to make the stuff that we use to make our products. Sorry about that bouncing around, but we use things that are very safe to work with, and I'll explain that in a minute. But where we do need to be concerned about, and where people should be concerned about with isocyanates, is any application where it becomes aerosolized. If you're spraying airplane bodies and truck liners for pickup trucks, anything that's going to put a urethane compound in the air that you might breathe, that's something you need to be aware of. Isocyanates are what's called a sensitizer. If you are exposed to them one time, nothing will happen. If you expose to them second time, you can go into an allergic response, difficult breathing, lung fluid buildup, something you need to get immediate attention to. So anytime you get exposed to an aerosolized version of a isocyanate, you need to be concerned about it. But in the floor covering world, nothing is aerosolized. It's all liquid form and so on. We use a lot of urethanes in our world, and without them, we would be in really big trouble, particularly in not having spandex. That's one of my favorite forms of urethane. But urethane bumpers, urethane foams, urethane gaskets, urethane adhesives, and one of my favorites, the Gorilla Glue. This is nothing but pure methylene diisocyanate that we use every day of our life for wood construction projects. Very safe product to use, not aerosolized and moving forward. So please be rest assured that when you're working with our urethane adhesives, they're safe. They are a chemical structure, and we do recommend that you use rubber gloves or gloves and proper PPE when using them, but they are certainly not death in a can. So the performance attributes of them is that they are 100% solids. There are absolutely no solvents added to them. There's no water. Obviously, water added in this bucket is going to cause it to react, and that's not a good situation. But why we mention no solvents and no water is because these adhesives are perfect for the installation of wood flooring, whether it be engineered or solid, and bamboo flooring. Water and bamboo and wood and engineered wood flooring do not go together well. You get swelling, cupping, and warping. So that's why we mention no solvents, no water. They're very low VOC, superior bond and tensile. They're very rubbery. Once they've fully reacted, they're essentially moisture resistant. They are resistant, they're moisture proof, and so on. So they have good flexibility, which is great for the natural movement of wood flooring, and good performance attributes. Downsides of them is they have moderate green strength. They have some wet suction to them, but they're not like a carpet glue, so keep that in mind. They're dependent on moisture to cure. So if you're working in an arid environment, say Arizona, where the ambient humidity can be 15% on a dry concrete slab, these things will be very difficult to cure. A light misting with water in the air will help. A humidifier will help. On the other hand, if you've got a wet environment, they can foam. I had an installation problem at one point where they were doing a mixed media installation. They had wood floor installed, and then they were going to put marble tile pieces in between a frame on the floor. They installed everything. It looked perfectly good on the afternoon. They came back the next day and the marble had lifted about 1/8 of an inch above the wood. Come to find out that the the marble pieces had to be cut on a wet saw. The marble was more damp than it should have been. When they put it into the adhesive bed, it foamed and actually lifted the marble up. So something to keep in mind when you're dealing with it. Again, they work by exposure to moisture. An open bucket is going to start curing process. Getting it on the floor is going to start the curing process. You need to be advised about that. And the same things will affect its performance as well: moisture, contaminants, and temperature. Always make sure the subfloor is properly prepared. Make sure it's flat. When you're installing wood flooring, you're dealing with a rigid structure. It does not necessarily want to conform to the subfloor. So that's why we are very vocal about making sure the subfloor is flat within that 3/16 and 10-foot range so that you have the proper contact. Definitely use the right notch trowel, so on and forth, for the application you're dealing with. Moisture controlling wood flooring adhesives that are urethane products have trowel clips in them for a reason. We want you to make sure that you get a monolithic layer and 100% coverage. So use those trowel clips. This kind of thing that you see in the picture on the right would be a failure from a moisture control standpoint and something that we would not warrant because you didn't follow the instructions. We do have a variety of urethane adhesives. 975, 977, 980, 995, and 570 are all what we call moisture curing urethane adhesives. So what goes into a silane modified adhesive? This is the last one in our category, and I'm running as usual out of time. Hopefully we can carry on for a little bit longer. But silane adhesives and polyurethane adhesives are very similar in their chemical construction, with the exception of, instead of having an isocyanate reactive group at the end of a polymer chain, it has a trimethoxy silane thing. Right in the middle of your screen, you see that functional group. And when that reacts with moisture, instead of creating CO2, it actually creates a little bit of methanol. A little bit of alcohol is part of the process. Not a huge amount of it, obviously not enough to create any kind of a flash fire or make you go blind by drinking it, but it is a natural byproduct of that process when it reacts with water. Same kind of attributes that we mentioned about for urethanes are true for silane-based adhesives. Silane adhesives do have some select advantages over urethanes in that they're much easier to clean when you get it on the surface of a pre-finished hardwood flooring. It doesn't etch into the surface of the finish. Urethanes etch into the surface because they have greater affinity, and adhesives don't have that same kind of affinity, so they're easy to remove. They're also somewhat non-foaming, which makes them, in my opinion, the best adhesive recommendation for bamboo flooring. I don't hear much about bamboo flooring in the market these days, but I know it's still out there. The challenge with bonding bamboo is that it's a non-porous back of it. The backing is coated just like the top, so you're trying to bond to a non-porous substrate. So there's no way for urethane, for example, to off-gas its CO2 into the open wood. You're sticking to a piece of plastic. MS adhesives don't off-gas, and that makes them a little bit easier for use on that area. Same conditions, they cure on exposure to moisture and humidity. The lack of moisture or excess moisture causes speed or slowness of time. Contaminants and temperature will also affect them. Again, same rules here. I don't need to go through all this. You've got this pretty much drilled into your head going forward. Improper subfloor conditions, too dry, not enough adhesive, dead glue, and so forth. We have a variety of MS adhesives in our line. 983, 985 are in our wood category. 907 is recently introduced fast set version. And we have 2 MS adhesives for LVT that work extremely well as well. In summary, where these adhesives can be used, and I can't bring all the rest of the product names back into this, but SBR adhesives are primarily used for action back, jute back, latex or urethane unitary back kinds of carpets. They're not to be used with anything vinyl. So no vinyl back carpet, no solid vinyl flooring, no virgin rubber flooring. Not recommended for wood because there's too much water in them, a lot of cupping and warping that goes onto there as well. Acrylic adhesives could be used for carpet, vinyl back carpet for sure. Regular action back and urethanes might not work because it's not really got the kind of leg development to hold that product in place. Vinyl back carpet, yes. VCT for sure. Solid vinyl flooring, fibrous material, yes. LVT would be where this would go. There are some acrylic adhesives designed for engineered wood only, not anything in the solid category. But again, they're high solids acrylics, specifically designed for engineered wood flooring. Epoxies, certainly not a functional recommendation for carpet or vinyl back carpet, not really where you want to go. You can use it underneath VCT, resilient flooring, solid vinyl flooring, rubber flooring for sure, but not recommended for engineered wood flooring. Nothing that's got natural movement I would recommend it easy for, because it would wind up breaking the engineered wood or the solid wood when it moved and changes humidity. Moisture controlled polyurethanes really are solely recommended for the installation of wood products or bamboo products. Some reground rubber would be the recommendation where a urethane would go. But as far as any of these other types of flooring materials, not a functional option. Silane-based adhesives are the new upcoming product category in the marketplace, definitely for anything vinyl. Could be used for VCT if you wanted to spend the money for that, but definitely in the resilient flooring market as well, and wood is so on and so forth. Critical success factors for these chemistries. For all SBRs, do not use the plasticized flooring. Avoid the introduction of contaminants, avoid high pH, high moisture conditions. Acrylics, make sure you follow all the working time recommendations. Mentioned here to do not leave pressure sensitive type adhesive open too long, and that's reason for that is the longer you leave it open, the more dust it can collect. It's a huge piece of fly paper, and it's going to collect dust. Dust is going to knock down your tack. Lack of tack is going to wind up creating a poor installation. Epoxies, you got to mix them properly. Spend time making sure you're mixing them and get all of part A and part B into the mix before you get it on the floor. Polyurethanes, avoid inundation of excess water. If you're in an arid environment, you might want to mist them with water to make sure they kick off. Clean them up immediately and don't let them cure on the surface of the flooring. Silane-based polymers, definitely observe the humidity requirements during installation. The last critical success factor is making sure you use the right trowel. This guy was obviously quite proud of all of his trowels. I wish I could have just thrown them all away, but it's important to follow the trowel and use a new trowel. They're a metering device to make sure you get the right amount of glue to do what we wanted to get it done. Part of it's also vertical lift. You want to get some sort of mountain of glue built so that when you lay your floor covering on the floor, it comes in contact with the adhesive. In some cases, it creates surface area for the adhesive to flash off faster. The average lifespan of these trowels is maybe 15 to 2,000 square feet on concrete. Please do not re-notch them. Get another one. It's much better to use that way. And with that, I think I rang the bell. Congratulations, all of you. You are now rocket scientists and adhesive chemists, but I would like to just close by saying, please do not let this knowledge go to your head and you're going to go out and become an adhesive chemist in the job site. That's not what we're about. I wanted you to understand how these things work. We have people that are PhD chemists that do all the work for you. Do not add things on the job site. I want to finish with one little short story. I did have a conversation with a contractor at one point back in the days when asphalt cutback adhesives were still in vogue. So this tells you how long that was. But I was starting to get complaints in my role as a product manager for that product that it was exhibiting some slow set times. So I was talking to a contractor. I asked him, do you have problems with the dry time of this particular adhesive? And he said, no, I never a problem. I said, really? Everybody seems to be complaining. Are you doing anything different? He said, well, when I get the adhesive, I take about a gallon of it out of the top of the 5-gallon bucket. I put a gallon of gasoline into the batch and I mix it up real well. And then I spread it all across the floor, get the whole area covered, and then walk out the door and flip a match over my shoulder and flash cure the thing, turn around and go install floor covering. Of course, my eyes were big and wide, say, are you still doing that? And he says, no, that practice has stopped. The last time I forgot to open the windows and doors and kind of blew the building out. So please don't be a chemist on the job site. With that, I'll turn the reins back over to Jen for any questions we might have. Jen?
Wow, that was a story. Oh my goodness. So we do have a question. Actually, why can you use water to remove wet adhesive, but you have to use mineral spirits when they're dry?
Yeah, this is a point that I've tried to make as well. Most water-based adhesives in their wet form can be cleaned up with water. When they're dried and coalesced and thoroughly cured out, that's when they get their moisture resistance to them. So a dried PSA is not going to you can't mop it up off the floor. You can't use water to resolvate it on your trowels or your tools because it's gone to its final film form. So the question is a good one. You know, why do water-based adhesives have water resistance to them? It's because you allow them to dry properly and get to that dried, coalesced phase. It's like acrylic house paint. It's all water-based. You clean your tape brushes with water. But once it's cured, the house can be rained on and nothing is going to re-emulsify and come up. The key factor is, and I want to mention this again, for pressure-sensitive adhesives that are in high moisture environments, you've got to let them dry first in order to get all of that performance that you want out of it, okay? Mineral spirits or some sort of solvent is about the only way to get them to re-emulsify and come off of your tools. That's the point. Water will not do it.
Makes sense. Okay. As a question, what is the difference between a moisture-resistant adhesive and a moisture barrier type of adhesive?
Yeah, this is a good question. Thank you.
Yep.
And important to note that some adhesives are designed to have moisture resistance characteristics, which means that they can survive and still do what they are supposed to be doing at elevated RH conditions or relative humidity conditions. That does not mean that they block the transmission of moisture through them. It's a screen, basically. Your window screens are resistant to water or rain, but they will still allow the rain to come through. A moisture barrier adhesive, on the other hand, is both resistant to the moisture, but blocks moisture transmission. And we have a few adhesives that are in that category. We've been doing this for a long time in the wood domain, or urethane, Eco 995, Eco 985, our Ultrabond Eco MS for LVT products, are moisture barrier and moisture resistant and barrier adhesives. So why that's important is that if you're installing a moisture sensitive flooring, you still need to protect that with a moisture resistant adhesive. Do you understand what I'm saying? If you have a flooring that you're installing on top of moisture resistant adhesive, your flooring is going to be affected because the adhesive did not block the moisture.
Yep.
Sorry.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Okay.
This makes sense to me, so hopefully it makes sense to everybody. If I can understand it, then I think you're in good shape. Okay, well, I'll give everybody just a few more minutes to type in any more questions if there are. And while we're waiting for that, I will say thank you very much, Jeff. That was a great presentation, as always.
Thank you.
And I'll invite everybody to please check out the floor covering page on our website, www.mapei.com, because there's some great information on adhesives and adhesive solutions. And oh, let's see here. I guess we are going to wrap up. So with that, I am going to thank you again and thank everybody for spending some time with us today. We know that things are very busy, and we really appreciate the fact that you take time out of your days to spend a little bit of time with us. So, Jeff, again, thank you for a great presentation. We'll look forward to your next one. And thank you, everybody else. And we'll see you again next time. Bye.